Hello and welcome to the Sideline Live podcast. My name is Orla Keeling and I am the host of the podcast, where every week we bring you a brand new episode with guests ranging from Olympic champions to local heroes, coaches, support staff and anybody involved in the world of sport. Each week we will dive into different topics, including current affairs in sport, identity, skill, mindset, coaching, and also shine a light on those flying under the radar. So tune in for brand new episodes, new stories, and new insights you've never heard before. Okay, delighted to be joined by Alan McConnell. Alan, thank you very much for joining me all the way from London. You're over my time on for a little while. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah. It's convenient that we're not having to do this in the wee small hours. Yes, you're right.
Give us an insight. I have a lot of Irish listeners. Don't have a huge Australian audience yet. Maybe someday. You wear a lot of hats. Give us an intro into who you are and what you do.
So, the bulk of my career, I was a trained physical education teacher as a starting point. I played AFL football as a young man and at a time when it was semi-professional. And so I was teaching and playing at that stage. And in 91, I started working for the first time on an AFL coaching staff and subsequently had a 35-year-odd career, a professional coaching career at that level, the last 6 or 7 years of which I also coached the AFL women's team at the Giants in Sydney. More recently, I still do a little bit of work in the AFL space, but more recently I've got headhunted to work in the Olympic sports field, where I now mentor and sort of like a critical friend to somewhere up around 70 coaches who are across the full domain of Olympic and Paralympic sports. And in the last 6 months, I've been doing a little bit of work in the corporate space.
Okay. Who or what influenced you to go into coaching post-playing?
It's quite interesting. So the male player that I probably finished up with the greatest affinity with, who often stays at my home these days, his father coached me when I was a young man, and I had a blue with him. And in fact, I thought I think if I thought I knew better, I probably should have a go myself. And so it's interesting, swings and roundabouts, that somebody who, we probably didn't connect really well. And here's his son and I are great mates, so that was probably the impetus to take it on. But I had a coach when I was 17, when I was a country boy, moved 3 hours to Melbourne to play AFL football and study. And I had a coach who I'd like to think I've tried to be. Well, have I deliberately tried to be like him? No, but I know that he had a profound impact on me. And in that context, I think when you have people in your life who provide you belief, it's a great gift.
Is that the key, coaching, instilling belief and confidence into your players, no matter the discipline? Obviously now you're involved in a wide range of sports.
Yeah, look, I think it's the lasting legacy I hope you leave with your players, that they are unique, they are worthwhile, they all in their own special way are special. And the truth is, given how long I've coached, I'm sure that's not what I've achieved with every one of them I've coached, but it certainly was my intent.
What do you think if I did stop, let's say, for example, Cora Staunton or Brid Stack, if I did stop them in the street and say, what's Alan's legacy or what was his impact on you, what would they say, apart from hopefully the belief and confidence?
Well, so I did bring Cora over, the first Irish girl to come over and play AFLW. it was interesting because I actually had nothing to lose. I was at the end of my career, and the pool of talent that we could select from was fairly limited, and so I was looking for somebody to put in the locker room that I knew that could win or knew how to win, what it took to win, and certainly the two names that you've mentioned personified winning. And what would they say about me? I'm not too sure. I'm very proud of the fact that I coached both of them. I can tell you that. It's one of the Cora's probably the most driven. Like, I coached for a long time, and I would say she was the most driven athlete I ever coached. I'd have loved to have coached her as a 20-year-old. I didn't get her till she was a bit older than that. I can't say how old she was. She'd probably shoot me. But I wish I'd coached her as a young woman. What an athlete and a competitor she was. And the fastest player in AFLW to 50 goals. Quite a phenomenal feat for somebody that before they played their first game had played in 2 practice matches. And still found a way to. And we weren't a great team. We had a couple of good seasons, but we weren't a great team. So unlike most of the better goal kickers in the competition who were playing in front of much more decorated teams and therefore were given far more of the football to try and kick goals with, Cora struggled because, for opportunity from that perspective. And so, great privilege. And the other thing is, like, in both cases, both of those women had significant injuries when they were with us in Sydney. Brid broke her neck, one of the worst days of my coaching career, when we were pretty fearful about what the outcome of that might be. And Cora badly broke her leg. When I first looked at the X-rays, it was horrific. And in fact, I fully said to her she'd struggle to play again. Little did I know. But their drive to manage those injuries without a support network, a long way from home, they are a great testament to, I think, what the Irish bring to the AFL game, and more particularly, I think it's the legacy, I think, of in the GAA, particularly where the game is amateur, and you reap what you sow. Their drive to get the most out of themselves and then go to work the next day, and in many cases have to drive from one side of the country to the other because of the way that your rules work. Not rules, but the expectation that you'll play with your team and your county, not somebody else's. Instills a discipline and a work ethic and a sense of belonging to something that is quite profound. I don't think I didn't answer your question at all, did I?
I don't even know. I can't remember what my question was, but I've enjoyed where you've brought me. Give us a Cora Staunton story. Like, when you say she's the most determined player you've ever met, that's remarkable. Give us a story. I particularly like the way you told her she wouldn't play and she came back and played. I'd say she loved doing that.
Well, she still reminds me. Don't worry. Look, I think when we lost, it was best to stay away from Cora for a couple of days, a day anyway. We had a real connection, and she talked to me a few times, and she'll hate me saying this. She talked to me a few times about the fact that because she was so good, she felt like her a number of coaches probably drove her pretty hard, and she didn't get a lot of praise. But by God, it was hard giving it to her. She would, like, for somebody who told me once that she'd like to have taken, had a bit more. Boy, she made it hard to live with her when you gave her some. But no, look, I just think, that drive clearly doesn't make her everybody's cup of tea. She polarizes people. I love her to death. She's the reason that it made it easy to recruit Yvonne Bonner and later on Brid Stack. And you know what? There's 40 players in the competition, in the AFLW competition this season. What a legacy she's left.
When you talk about Brid and Cora and all the players you've seen, in terms of the Irish players, what do we bring? Like, is it that because we're amateur here and we play at such elite levels, is that determination? Is that the difference between us and the players in Australia? Apart from obviously not growing up loving the sport.
Well, I think, look, you need a degree of athleticism. So we're probably fortunate that we're picking the best of the athletes in a way from that space. So that's a given. But then I do think the drive, the competitiveness, the will to want to get better, that comes with it, a capacity to. If you're trying to learn a new sport and you don't have an open mindset to learning, you can't take feedback. You shouldn't go there, because when you go from the top of the pile to the bottom of the pile, if you aren't open to learning new things, if you're protecting or hiding what it is you can't do, it's a bit of an impediment to growth and change. And so certainly the ones that I had were very driven to get better.
Of all the players you've seen, what separates the greats from the rest? Of any player, is there a pattern or a trend?
Many of the very, very best are hard to work with sometimes. Self-belief. I mentioned to you that I caught up with Steve Kerr before we started this today, and he, in fact, one of the things Steve said, because he played with Michael Jordan, he said that Michael Jordan had an emotional dominance that he'd never seen in anybody else. So he clearly was physically, he was exceptional, but he just dominated the space emotionally that he was in. And I think that the truly great players care so much that they don't care. So when they muck up, it's like, give me the ball again. And whereas those that maybe aren't quite in that space, they can become gun shy and might take 5 or 10 minutes before they actually want to put themselves back into that space. Whereas the best of the best, they care so much they don't care, and that can be not easy to live with for some people that are around them. Like it can be perceived as arrogance. It can be perceived as self-indulgent. And trust me, I don't think any of the people that I've talked about fit that bill. In fact, quite the opposite. I recruited people for what they, not just what they were, particularly the Irish girls, not just for what they could do on the pitch, but what they brought off it. As I said to you earlier, I told Cora after I recruited her, I said, listen, I'm not bringing you over to be a good player. I'm bringing you over to support the locker room and and your legacy will be to leave the girls with an understanding of what it is that takes to win, because the sport at that stage was very much in its infancy. It was season 2. Semi-professional athletes trying to transition to full-time athletes. And and her legacy wasn't to be a good player. It was to be a great teammate and a driver of professionalism, if you like. And she I don't think she liked it. I think she had bigger ambition than what I had for her, and good on her.
Yeah, it's interesting with what you said there about Steve Kerr and Michael Jordan. I'm assuming you watched The Last Dance.
Indeed.
Amazing. When Michael says that, I forget the episode. It could have been near the end of the series. Could have been the last one, where he actually gets emotional in it, and he says, "I did it the way I needed to do it to win, and I did everything, and I never asked my teammates to do something I wouldn't do. But he gets a bit emotional because, you know, he has this perception of not being a nice guy. And you were talking about, they don't care what others think. Maybe at the latter stages of the career they do, but is that the price that you pay when you're that good that sometimes you can just piss people off?
Well, Steve actually said Michael wasn't his favourite player to play with. And it was to do with that. It was the fact that he drove them and drove them and drove them. And it's actually not easy to live with, which is the very reason why high performance sport isn't for everybody.
Absolutely. Sharon Madigan is a nutritionist with Sport Ireland, works with all of our Olympians, and she gave me a line: elite sport is not healthy. Would you agree with that?
It's like everything in life, it can be. Look, if you want to be the best at anything in the world, it takes drive, it takes commitment, it takes hard work, it takes talent. And I guess with all of that comes a degree of obsession. And obsession can be healthy and it can be unhealthy. It can be social and it can be antisocial. So I think it's I think the same is true in any facet of life. You know, our strengths can be our vulnerabilities, is probably the best way to say it. So
you reminded me of I was only rewatching The Office, and Michael Scott goes for a job interview. He says, what are your greatest, or what are your biggest weaknesses? And he said, I work too hard, I care too much, and I love people too much. And he flips it in a positive way. But in terms of what are we not doing with kids? Like, in terms of coaching, what are we missing the ball on, do you think, Alan?
The fundamentals and the notion that one needs to specialise too soon. There's any amount of evidence that kids who've played a myriad of different games, particularly in the invasion games, are better for it. Look, I think the best athletes, the best players, the best performers have a degree of groundedness about them. And so, the way you get groundedness is to live life. And so ensuring that you've lived a full life, a good life, a rounded life, in the pursuit of some sort of an obsession is, for me, the key.
So I'm getting the sense, talking to you, in terms of if you were back recruiting for AFLW, say, not only are you looking for the physical attributes, obviously the athleticism and the skill, but particularly you've lived a bit of life, you're a good person. Are you going to add to the locker room? Particularly with who we mentioned, Cora was looking for winning and stuff. But when you're recruiting, then how important is the person, not just the player?
If you're going to recruit somebody from Ireland, as opposed to somebody around the corner or down the road, there's a risk reward that comes with that. That means that it's a betting game, isn't it? Like if there's more athleticism or there's more talent, the individual is more unique, and maybe comes with a few foibles. One needs to look at what are the what's the upside for the extra effort, and I think we have a draft system in the AFL, so you have to take your turn to take your pick, and the earlier picks generally pick themselves, but it's interesting, there are some athletes that slide, and it's because of that very factor. They finish up, whilst their talent would suggest they should be very early in the draft, they last a little bit longer because either they've had a checkered career from an injury perspective, or maybe they're a bit left to centre in terms of how they manage, what they're going to take to manage, and so it's a betting game, isn't it?
Yeah. will we see? I know the game is growing. It's AFLW in Australia, and we're seeing a lot of Irish girls going over now. Will it ever stop? Will it ever cap?
Um, well, the Irish girls particularly seem to love it. It affords them a good lifestyle. The wage is now becoming sustainable with a sort of a full-time career. It's interesting. The best of the girls this year played. Some of them played in the All Ireland final. I'm not sure how long that's sustainable. If I'm paying somebody to a fair bit of money to play for my team and they turn up 2 days before the season starts, I'm not sure that's a great look for the locker room. And there's a couple of teams where girls have done that this year. And I think the teams would have expected they'd be having better years than they are right now. And I'd rather not go into which teams and who, but that's certainly true of this season.
So in terms of when the teams grow, and I was talking to Cora about this, it's not really going to stop, particularly, and like from an Irish perspective, geez, well, half the people in their mid-20s are over in Australia anyway. So when you've got an offer to be a professional, get paid for the commitment levels that you're putting in at home, probably a little bit more commitment levels as a pro, but geez, it's a no-brainer. But from a sport point of view and a selfish point of view in Ireland, we're losing our best players from our game.
Yeah, I get that. And it's the game has such a rich history and is so important to the fabric of communities. Yeah, so I get that.
But it's probably a testament to all the Irish that have gone on and done so well, because if Cora hadn't worked out, we probably wouldn't be looking at 40 players now in the AFLW.
Yeah. Look, I'm really proud of the fact that we were the first, and she was prepared to say yes. And that said, I nearly chickened out. Like we mucked up the visa. She was supposed to come over because that year her club won the All Ireland final, and so we kept on having to push back when she was going to come over to have a trial. And anyway, eventually she found a small window, and at that stage she'd told nobody nobody apart from a couple of her closest friends, nobody knew what was going on. And she arrived at the airport and we'd mucked up the visa, so she had to go home again and come back the next day, which meant she actually arrived the day before the draft. She got off the plane, came straight to the club, had a kick, and the ball was flying everywhere. Like it was not the best audition. And unfortunately, a lot of very good-willed staff sort of turned up to watch and all started to help. And of course, all of a sudden, Cora's got 10 people coaching her, which wasn't conducive. Anyway, my then head coach in the males program, because I was the director of coaching for the men at the same time, he came out and watched the last 5 minutes of our kick, and he said, "Oh, what do you think?" And I said, "Oh, I'm not too sure about this." I said, "I'm not sure." He said, "Listen, buddy, trust yourself, get on with it." And away we went, so I walked out the other end of the space. We're having a kick, shook our hands and said, "You're in."
When you were director of football, it's actually very interesting. Like I noticed kind of doing my research, you're one of few coaches in AFL, and I think probably in most sports, you've coached at every single level going up the ranks. So what makes a great coach, Alan?
I've seen lots of good coaches who don't have great game plans or can't necessarily teach the game exceptionally well, but what they do have is the capacity to unite people to a common cause. So I think hard work, understand the game, good with people. You can probably be two of the three and be okay, but you can't be one of them. And ideally, you're all three. But I wish it was just that simple. you can be great one week and terrible the next. Like you can think that connection and creating an environment is your specialty, and something goes wrong and you misspeak or manage it the wrong way, and you can go from chocolates to boiled lollies in a pretty big hurry.
Mm.
Yeah.
When you're a director of football, when a coach is, let's say, going through, let's say, a losing run or anything, and they come to you, how do you help kind of go through I'm thinking of a lot of coaches, that might not have a support system behind them. What advice do you give people as coaches, when they're struggling in that moment or period of time?
I think as a coach, it's really important to understand what you stand for, what matters. In fact, I now work with a large number of coaches. I put, in excess of 70 coaches, and the ones that are best at what they do have clarity. They have clarity about what they do, what matters, what's important, what values they're going to operate by. And then everything else sort of falls into line after that. You obviously need technical and tactical capacity and skill, but what fights to have and which ones to not have. When you have that fight, how do you want to turn up in that dispute or that moment of conflict? What do you want to be? Are you trying to change people, or are you trying to support their growth? And it's a fine line between, imposing your will on somebody and nurturing the greatness that's within them. And that's part of why I think right now high performance coaching has become, it's certainly far more difficult now than it was when I first started. Political correctness is the wrong term to use here, but it's a fine line now between that sweet spot of support and challenge and being seen as a bully. And it's so easy to get it wrong, because with sport comes a degree of passion and energy, and so an emotion, because people are doing this because of their attachment to the game and their what the game gives to them, by and large, not entirely, but by and large. And so with that level of energy and passion and emotion, that the mixed bag of feelings that come with that, it's very, very easy to say something with good intent, but it's received in a completely different manner. And so, and we also live in a world now, the way I see it, where education is a bit more free-spirited than it was certainly when I was growing up. And in that context, every child player wins a prize. It's a bit like going to the sideshow. Like, you can get through your secondary school these days, and you can get a bit of paper that says you've done year 12, but have you actually, what level of competency have you achieved? And that's now a very different question. And so therefore, when you take people out of that environment into an environment where it's very exacting and, the attention to detail, the difference between standing on one side of your opponent and the opposite side of your opponent in the AFL game, and the ball is 150 metres away, can be very profound. And so that level of detail, that level of attention to detail is very difficult to master with somebody who's basically learnt for a long period of time that, you can pretty much do what you like and it'll be okay. We'll give you another chance and another chance and another chance. And eventually, my sense is that I think team sport to a point builds character. And then I think there's a tipping point where maybe it eliminates those that don't have it.
Very interesting. I was actually having a conversation around the whole participation piece, and a coach, he had a brilliant take. He said, God, when you work with athletes who run track, Jesus, they know exactly who wins, because the whole thing is first, second, third, and it doesn't, well, you obviously get a placing, but you're not getting a medal past third place. But in team sport, there is this show up and you get a cert or you get a piece. But it's trying to find, as you say, it's trying to find a balance of how do we keep these kids interested and having fun, but have the competition and teach them the lessons. Like, you know, and as you say, it's a very fine line. Like, what would you say to a club or somebody listening now that runs a competition on participation medals?
You need to employ good people. Kids will generally connect themselves to things because of their peers. That the reason why they want to go is that peer pressure to be something with their mates. But very significantly, the person calling the shots, the coach, is the reason why they'll stay or not. You can't employ too many good people.
Yeah. It's trying to find, again, because we're volunteers, it's trying to trying to find the balance of it. When you talk about good people, what are the attributes of a really good coach? Like, what have you seen?
Well, that's what I said earlier. You know, sometimes the good person isn't necessarily the technically most savvy. He or she is not necessarily, was not the greatest player. You know, and fortunately, I think those days have gone, but we do tend to still pivot to that a little bit. The ability to work, but we're now particularly talking about team sports. And so, you know, this has part of been my learning curve in the last 3 or 4 years, working with coaches who basically are with athletes one-on-one, 24/7. Like now we're talking about an intense relation. You know, a beach volleyball team, one coach, 2 athletes, and they probably, you know, if you're in Australia, particularly because most of the competition is in Europe, the US, or Asia, so they're spending potentially half of the year on the road to qualify for an Olympic Games. Small budgets, so they're probably sharing rooms. You want to be able to get on. And again, they're chasing dreams. So it's not as though they're on a holiday and, you know, you can go to a different beach tomorrow because, you know, we had a disagreement last night over dinner. You got to turn up and train or play again with the same people. Yeah, it's it is. It is, but if it's intense all the time, it's also going to rub off. Not cut it either. And so, when is the right time to back off? Not that easy. Okay, so I did a fair bit of. I coached men for 30 years before I coached a female locker room. It was a great shock to me to have people run past me wearing false eyelashes during training. It was it was like, what was that? And you know, what you perceive, the perception you have about what is normal is challenged. The bus ride to the game is completely different. One is very quiet, very dour, speaking in whispers, and the other one, the rock box is firing and everybody's wanting to dance, you know, like, so there's some physical differences, but for me, the biggest difference by a long way is that, and I think this is a generalization, and so there are exceptions to every rule, and so I don't think there's a rule, but I think in general, the more women feel like they belong, the more likely they are to perform well. And for men, I think when they've performed well, they feel like they belong. So it's a bit different. But what I'd also say is that I think the men have evolved over my 30-year career to be a bit more like that. that sense of belonging is more important now than it probably was. And my sense will be that maybe the women will go the other way as the AFLW game becomes more professional. I think the other thing that's interesting is that one needs to be women are socialised to please, and I'm talking about in the Western world. And so the women certainly listen more intently, are more grateful for what they're given. But with that comes a bit of a challenge in that they're happy to compete with the girl from in the next town, but at training, that desire to be a bit bitchy or be a bit aggressive or to be assertive in training is a much harder stretch, because you run the risk as a girl of being seen as the bitch with your peers, with your mates. And so the finding the right way to nurture a competitive environment in training for team sports is a bit more challenging, I think, for women than it is for men. And the other bit of that comes with that is, I think that if one needs, in feedback sessions, one needs to be careful not to lavish too much praise on one individual, because you run the risk of that girl being isolated by the rest. Jealousy is a bit more prevalent in the locker room, a little bit.
So give us a practical example of your approach, let's say with a similar situation, but how you would maybe approach it differently with the men's team versus the women's team.
So when I was coaching the women at Western Sydney, when I took over that program, we only had 3 or 4 girls on the entire list who came from Sydney. Everybody else had moved town. I wanted them. They were the worst team in the competition year one, and so there was a lot of self-doubt, and B, it's a bit like they were on holidays for the season. Like they were moving somewhere to play footy, and then they were going to go home again. And I wanted them to feel like they really belonged. So we didn't just have dinner at our home every year. We had Christmas dinner at our home every year, and we cooked for the entire team, because I wanted them to know that I had their backs, that we considered them, and this was my partner and I, Susie, so we would actually have them to our home. We would cook the dinner. We would serve the dinner like they were our family guests. Now, I did exactly the same thing for the men, but I would more than likely buy in the food, or cook chooks or something. Whereas, so I think just being really transparent about the fact that the connection had to be genuine, if you like. It couldn't be faux, because I think the girls see through that in 2 seconds.
A lot of coaches in Ireland speak about women want to know, if you do a drill with a men and women's team, the men will, if you tell them to run through a wall, the men will do their best to run through the wall, but the women will first say why and look for the reason behind it. Was that your experience as well?
My experience with game plans is that the women, because of this thing around pleasing, they wanted a far more expansive written document about what they should do in every given moment, because it mitigated the risk that they might be wrong. The game plan could be wrong, but it meant that they wouldn't be. So I found there was a bit of an obsession with the game plan in the women's space, and I'd link it. My link was to that being the cause. Don't have any research to justify that, but but that was also a bit linked to some of the stuff I'd read. So there's no very, very little written research around the differences between coach, but there are a number of biographies about of men who've coached men for a long time and then coached women. And the other thing is that my experience, the things that I'm saying are my experience as a male coaching females. Would it be different if it was a female coaching men and women? I can't answer that because I only know it through my lens.
Across your career, Alan, do you think, like, was the majority of your time in Aussie Rules spent, like, were you more of a teacher, a strategist, or a culture builder?
I think teacher, and evolved into the culture space, I think.
Interesting. Do you think that was because you were involved from day one as well? You were the first employee at the club.
See, I coached at 2 other clubs before I got to the Giants. Yeah, look, I think by the time I got to the Giants as the first employee, I was acutely aware, excuse me, I was acutely aware that when you're starting something out from scratch, you have no supporters. Like there's nobody, and particularly in the part of Sydney we were in where AFL wasn't played, it's a rugby league heartland. We had to ensure that everybody we came into contact with weren't necessarily looking for them to become stuck on, if you like, but we wanted them to become advocates at least for what we did. So that if they didn't become members or supporters or, jump on board, then at least they wouldn't be undermining what we're trying to do. And if somebody said, "Oh, what do you think of?" they would at least be able to say something positive about what it is, or who we were, what we're trying to achieve. Yeah. So, and I think at the end, the thing that I was probably trying to do most was to encourage the girls to love the team, love the club, love the game. And I think if you have a deep-seated connection to what it is you're doing, people will see that. You can usually smell it.
One of my favorite questions, Alan, is what's the biggest lesson you've learned from sport? I would love to hear your answer to this one.
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I think I'm still learning. There is always tomorrow. Sport, it is just a game. I lost an athlete through suicide, and yeah, I think the thing that's evolved most for me over my career is having an increased sense of understanding about what really matters, and working with people. They're all different, and some of them are very different. And I don't think you should coach anybody if you can't find something about them that you love.
Yeah, that's amazing. What, in terms of like leadership in sport, I love asking about captains. Can you, like, what makes a quality leader that is just a brilliant captain? Is there anyone that comes to mind in any particular story, Alan?
Okay, so not from mine, but there's a book called The Captain's Club.
Okay, I haven't read that.
You need to read it. It's done some research about what the author did some work around. Well, he looked at serial winning teams in their particular area, and he set up some criteria that you had to achieve to be considered one of those serial winning elite teams. And then what he did was he went about looking at what it was about those teams that was consistent from one program to the next. And I think in the end he had about 4 or 5 different teams that were repeatedly won and they did it year after year after year. The All Blacks being one of those, for example. And he thought he was going to find that the thing that was consistent was going to be related to the board, to the chairman, to the coach. And in fact, the only one consistency across all of his research, all of the teams that fitted, that was the nature of the captain. Selfless, like always put others first, competitive to the point where they would almost break the rules to win. Like a very, very fine line, unbelievably competitive, always deferred to other people, were some of the criteria that they talked about that that those teams all had.
Wow. I have to read that book. I'm going to go buy it now tomorrow. Alan, if I could give you the key to go and watch any coach or team in the world, who would you love to observe and be a fly on the wall for?
No, look, one of the things that the last 3 or 4 years of my career has done is my world has expanded so much. I had a young coach I worked with, female, who took a heavyweight boxer to Paris to fight in the Olympic Games. Now, the notion that would have anything to do with boxing, first of all, is bizarre. And secondly, to be able to work with this young woman and, she personified woman in a man's space and some of the shit she had to deal with, but equally, and the internal narratives that she had to manage. The flip side of that, I also worked with, leading into Paris, the national women's water polo head coach who took over the program 7 months out from Paris. And they were ranked 8th in the world and they got pipped in the final, got a silver medal. And there's greatness everywhere is what I've learned in recent times. And if you confine it to, like, going to watch an equestrian coach, because they're not dealing just with the human being sitting on the back of the horse. They're trying to coach the horse, and you move the rein or pull on it too hard, and you're giving the message to a horse that. So, yeah, one of the people I listened to at the conference that I was at yesterday, who I also have listened to a couple of times before and collaborated with some of the coaches that I work with, is a conductor who when I first met him was the conductor of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. Now he's managing 70 people plus, all playing different instruments, and he's not allowed to say a single word. And at the end of the day, unlike the world where I live, where the board appoints me and I tell them what to do, if they muck it up at the end, after every performance that they put on, the feedback that's delivered from the orchestra to management decides whether he gets another gig or not. So that they hold all the power as to.
Wow.
And so the difference between that and this so it's a long answer.
No, but it's fascinating. It actually reminds me of some of the Dublin senior men's football team who went on to do an historic 5 in a row here in Ireland. Some of their players
The
kind of
Dubs,
spoke
everybody
about.
hates the Dubs, don't they?
Yeah. Well, I'm a Dub, so they can hate all
Well,
they
so
want.
it's not in your case.
Not in my case. But one of the players spoke about two things they did. Separate to the team, he did a leadership course with the GPA, the Gaelic Players Association. It was on leadership, and they actually brought the participants to coach horses, and he said it was amazing because you like the horse wouldn't be paying attention to you. You had to try get attention for the horse to pay attention to you. Never mind start coaching. And one of the other pieces they did in 2019, and or maybe it was earlier. Anyway, they got a conductor of an orchestra, David Brophy, to come in, and now David is doing a lot of leadership work. So I've heard of that before. It's just because you mentioned it was fascinating. Alan, I'm gonna potentially hold you to this, but we've had a brilliant conversation. But is there anyone who I should get on, and you would hopefully help me to get on the podcast? Who should I try interview?
God. What do you want to know about most?
What separates the best from the rest is probably if I ever do a PhD, it'll be in that.
The best from the rest. I'm going to have to take that on notice, and I'm happy for you to come back at me, because
Or even leadership in sport. I'm fascinated by that as
yeah,
well. If there's anyone who comes to mind.
yeah, um, yeah. No, I'm not sure I've got a simple answer for you off the cuff.
No worries. Look, I'll take Steve Kerr and Mikel Arteta if you make the connection maybe someday. Alan, I'm going to move on to sideline 7. It's the same 7 questions at the end of every episode. Question 1: what is your favorite quote?
I actually don't have one. What I do know is I'm more concerned about clarity around your mission and your values. So for me, you can go to a book and pull quotes that, but if they're not aligned to who you are and what really matters, so probably I can't say that I have a particular quote.
Very good. That's a good answer. Question 2: best sporting event you've been to?
If you've ever been to the AFL Grand Final, it's pretty amazing, and it does happen every year. But a home Olympics, the Sydney Olympic Games, it wasn't just at the venue; it was the whole city. The vibe around that experience was just exceptional, and I'm hoping that the same might occur in Brisbane in a couple of years' time.
Very good. Question 3: biggest setback or challenge so far in your career, and how did you react to it?
I think getting sacked is very difficult. You get better at it because it's like everything. The more you practiced it, the better you get at it. It's not easy. And I think coaches I've not worked with a single coach who doesn't have a voice in the back of their head that's driving them, that sometimes is trying to hijack what it is they're trying to do. And managing that when things aren't going your way, I find an intriguing space to work in. But losing an athlete, which I touched on earlier, yeah, there are some things that matter in life, and then there are things that really matter. And I'm proud of how I look to support people in that time, particularly the family, and the athlete themselves before they took their life. I'm proud of the fact that she didn't trust too many people, but I thought she trusted me. Um, yeah, that's probably where that sits.
Wow. Well, powerful. Thanks for your honesty around that as well. Question 4, Alan, your biggest achievement on or off the pitch?
I'm still chasing. I've never won any big titles. I coached a premiership team in my second year when I first started out in 1985. And not much else since then. I think I'd like to think it's the impact I've had on some of the people that I've worked with along the way. But yeah, I not have I've had a great life. I've done things for most of my life and got paid for doing it, doing what a lot of people would do for free in their spare time as a volunteer if they could. So I've had a great life, but have I ever achieved? I'm not sure that, I'm not sure I see that as achievement. So so the answer is I'm still chasing having impact with people.
Yeah. I love that answer. I hadn't had that one before, so I love that answer. Question 5, advice to your 18-year-old self.
Believe in yourself. It'll be okay.
Brilliant. Question 6, dream dinner guest and why?
Obama. I think coming from a marginalised percentage of the population to achieve the office he did, that journey fascinates me. To overcome the obstacles he needed to get to that office. And then I think if you're in that office, to be able to, at the end of the time, like politics, you're always going to piss some people off. You're going to have, but for me, the way he carried himself, his intent always seemed to have integrity attached to it, whether you agreed or disagreed with his policy or his, or whatever. But I think, and the other thing is that at that level, you're actually just paid to make all the decisions that no one else will. And so how you live with that, because some of those decisions are probably life and death decisions for other people. And so being able to turn the light off and not toss and turn all night, I think there's an intriguing number of conversations to have there.
Yeah, he's actually coming to Dublin to do an in-person conversation. I think he might be in London soon. Maybe you might be able to catch him while you're there.
Everybody goes to Dublin, don't they?
Yeah, I tell you, we're the place to go to. And final question before I let you go: if your life was a book, Alan, what chapter would this be called?
Up next, because I think I've been in a real growth period professionally in the last 3 or 4 years. When I thought maybe my career was going to fall over, like I've developed new skills. I've got a completely different network. I'm actually doing the same things that I've done all my life, but in domains that I don't have, as I said, what I would know about ski moguls that could write on a matchbox. And I'm working with ski moguls coaches who are all trying to do amazing things. So I think what's up next is for me in the context of growth.
Amazing, Alan. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed it.